Hello and welcome to this quick guide on setting up some traps in Crayta. So we've already looked at traps a little bit in the OBI components package, and there are already traps that are available for you to integrate in your game as and however you want to do that. What this tutorial was really about was looking into how we can give our players the opportunity to do that. So how can we empower them to lay their own traps, to lay down some landmines, to lay down some laser grids and all that sort of stuff in the game whilst they're playing it. And so we looked at combining some of the obstacle course, the OBI components package with some of the inventory components package, and then writing our own little bits and pieces of scripting that we needed to use in order to combine them. So if I show you the landmine itself is essentially made up of the inventory stuff that we needed. So we've got the pickup spawner script and the inventory item spec script. Both of those are added to anything that you want to put in your inventory. And so what they do is they really manage the item itself in your inventory. We also have, I'm going to gloss over trap script for now, but we also have the activation timer script and the obstacle blast script. So these two come from the OBI components package, which you can find on the community. By typing in OBI components, and you can download that and then add those as well. And so by adding those, you're essentially making something that can explode. So we're leveraging this stuff to make a trap that will explode, and we're leveraging this stuff to make something that you can put in your inventory. And then we're combining it with this script here, which is the trap script. And in here, all we're doing is using the onHeld function, which is called from our inventory. We're using that to store a reference to the player in this script, because we need to use that when someone presses a button. What we're doing is we check whether this particular trap is being held and that we have pressed the primary button. And then it's simply a case of finding out where the player is currently looking and using where they're looking to place a mine in that location. We're also doing a quick check to see whether where they're looking is too far away, because we don't want to be giving them the opportunity to place landmines on the top of buildings when they're really, really far away. Unless you do want to do that, in which case you might want to change some of this here. We've actually set ourselves a little value here, player reach, which is how far away we'll allow our players to lay a landmine. Once we've determined that where they want to lay it is within reach, we do some logic where we're setting the rotation according to which direction we're facing, which is more useful for the tripwire stuff that I'll explain in a minute. And then we are removing one of whatever this is from our inventory. So if this is a landmine and you've got 10 landmines, then doing this center script remove template and sending the template of the thing you want to remove and how many of them you want to remove, that will remove one. So if we've got 10 landmines, we now have 9 landmines because you've just put one on the floor, ready to trap someone. We're also doing this line here, which is generating a new instance of this template and adding it to the game world where you're currently looking at, and setting the rotation accordingly. We also do this center script activate trap thing, which is more applicable to the tripwire. So the first trap, which is the landmine, looks a bit like this. So you are holding it, and then by pressing the primary button in the game, you put one on the floor. And because it's got the OBI component script already attached to it, when I walk over it, it will explode. Going back to the trap script, we also have this stuff that is for the tripwire. So if I open up the tripwire, you can see that this is just the security laser, and that's just telling you which direction this tripwire is going in. Now you could put in there some of those lasers that there's meshes to put some lasers on there too. But I quite like the idea of it being invisible, so I didn't do that. This is the same sort of setup as the landmine. So we've got the pickup spawner and the inventory item spec script. We've got the activation timer script and the obstacle blast script. But where it's slightly different And we also have the trap script, which I've explained a little bit. Where it's slightly different is we've got this Tripwire script. So in the Tripwire script, we're actually creating our own trap logic. So every frame, we're checking whether someone has crossed a line between this this entity, a line that shoots about, well, its default is 500, but you could set that to whatever you want. We're checking whether something has crossed that line. You've crossed the line, and we check whether something has crossed that line, and we're also checking whether that thing was a character. So we're doing something called raycasting here, and raycasting is essentially taking a position in a point or a position in a 3D world and shooting a direct beam from that point to another direction, in a direction. It doesn't matter what direction that is, but raycasting is the process of doing that. And the reason you do that is that raycast is checking to see, is there anything between where this is and the end of the ray is? Is there anything between those two things? So we can see we're using a value called ray start, which is essentially the position of the thing that's in the game world. And then we're creating a sort of a ray end, the end of the ray, by saying, okay, from the ray start position to in the direction that we're facing to the length of the ray, which is set here at 500. This is really similar to how the guns work. So if you've ever looked at the gun script, you'll see this same thing, this raycast happening there, except the ray length for those guns is more like 5,000, which is sort of like more like a kilometer in distance in the game world. Once it's done that, it's sending an event called raycast crossed. So that means that we have this Tripwire script, which is essentially just checking whether a ray has been crossed. So you don't have to add that to a trap. It could be added to anything. And when a ray has been crossed, it's saying run whatever function is in here. This could be one function. This could be 10 functions. It's as many functions as you like. But by decoupling it in that way, it means that it's more usable in different situations. So the Tripwire Trap has got this Tripwire script attached, which is literally the logic involved in checking whether something has set off this trap, in order to make sure that the player who's holding the trap while they're running around looking for where to place it, in order to make sure that they don't set it off, we had to set up an active flag, which starts as false. So we're saying that this trap isn't on by default. And then in the trap script, when the trap has been placed, we actually are doing this center script function, which is saying any scripts that are attached to the trap, run, if they have an activate trap function, run that activate trap function once it's been positioned in the world. And that activate trap function is here. And all that's doing is setting that flag to true, so that when we're checking the on tick, we're saying, all right, only if you've been activated do you want to go and do this raycasting stuff and check whether something has run in front of you. At which point, run this function if they have. So this is another, so there's a couple of different ways of doing those traps. There's the landmines, which I've already looked at. The tripwire is quite fun. And by keeping it invisible, we can position it on this wall here and make it slightly more difficult for someone to walk down this corridor. Gives a little bit of that sort of, you can make a game where there's no guns and it's just about laying traps and having awkward situations. But hopefully this has been a useful glance into looking at traps and how we might go about combining some of the stuff we've already looked at and creating traps from it, and then writing a little bit of our own logic to see, okay, well, maybe we want to add some new types of traps that don't already exist. So these two are based on things that I've heard of in reality. But who knows where you could go with all of the different things you can do with traps. Maybe there's a trap that only fires if your character is running a certain speed. you know, like in the film Speed. Who knows? But I'll leave that with you. Hopefully you found this useful and it's inspired you to think about different ways you might be able to add some traps to your game. And don't forget, they don't have to be traps. They could also be rewards. If you wanted them to be rewards, they could give you something rather than taking away your health. Or they could just be surprise events that happen in your game world. Who knows? Anyway, I'll leave that with you and I look forward to seeing what you make with it in Crayta.